And I'm coming to you from the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam lands. So I reside over here part-time. A few housekeeping things. We will do the panel discussion, and then any questions that you have, you can drop them in the chat. And for land acknowledgements, if you guys are up for it, drop your land acknowledgement in the chat. It's kind of fun. So we might have time for a few questions at the end. So am I good to go? Can I get, okay. All right, so this is the Indigenous Roundtable series, a third in a series, and it's established to support Indigenous leadership and creative practice in Montana and beyond. We're hosted by Western Montana Creative Initiative and Open Air. And this was just the idea that we had to, let's see, support creative agencies. So this is a panel discussing the value, obstacles, and approaches to Indigenous creative agency and leadership in the arts. And our panelists today are Mandy Smoker Broaddus, Lenny Peppers, and Emmy Sings in the Timber. And a lot of their background is a part of the discussion. So I'm not gonna do a strong intro, because their introduction has a lot to do with their background in art. So first, let's see, I'll go ahead and go into the introduction, just so that we have time to get through the questions. And I'll go ahead and start with Mandy.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm Mandy Smoker Broaddus. I'm a Fort Peck, Assiniboine and Sioux tribal member, and today I'm in Helena, Montana. I moved to Helena from my reservation 19 years ago, and I never thought that I would stay here this long, but here I am. I guess, when you have children and they find their own home, you kind of gotta ride it out with them. But I think this is an amazing panel and discussion. I think we have some great sort of topics to engage with, and just really happy to be here. So thank you for that. Let's see. So I don't even know where to begin as far as my creative journey. I always wanted to be a writer, and I am primarily a poet that have recently been sort of dipping into the graphic novel world. I also write some nonfiction and want to do more of that in the future. But I always wanted to be a writer. Something I fell in love with, kept lots of journals. Thought my path would probably be journalism. And then in undergraduate school, that just wasn't right for me. So then I sort of turned to literature, where I could still read a lot and write a lot, in addition to education, because I've been really, really lucky to have a lot of tremendous educators and instructors and teachers in my life that have made such a difference. So that was important part of my sort of journey. Went on to go actually teach literature at my own tribal college, at Fort Peck Community College, and just really loved that experience. I'm a teacher and an administrator. Did that in my home community of Fraser, Montana. Then moved to Helena to work for the state of Montana, and our new Indian Education for All initiative, and our new state level funding to support Native students, which was sorely needed, and a really big effort I had the good fortune to work with Denise Juneau for my tenure at OPI, and really, got to travel the state and meet a lot of people and learn a lot from different communities. I got my MFA from the University of Montana, where I, got to study with some amazing faculty, have some really great fellow writers in that program. I went on to publish my collection of poems, Another Attempt at Rescue, a long, long time ago. And I'm working on a second book right now. In the interim, I published an anthology on human rights issues around the world, really, with my good friend Melissa Kwasny. We went on to serve as co-poet laureates together from 2019 to 2021. I worked as a producer and consultant on an award-winning PBS documentary called Indian Relay. And I feel like I'm just listing things off now, so that's exhausting. And I wrote a graphic novel this past year with my good friend Natalie Peeterse. That came out in April, about a Lakota girl sort of trying to find her way and using her traditional values and teachings to really guide her in her journey. And I'm working on another one. So I don't know, that probably sounds really boring, but that's about me.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. It's inspiring. So thank you. And next we will hear from Lenny Peppers.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lenny Peppers. You can call me just Lenny. I'm a matriarch and young elder. I'm just kidding. That's a Reservation Dogs reference. Basically, I'm a weird artist who manages a theater in town and gets degrees seemingly willy-nilly. I have a few. One of them's in journalism, one of them's in film. I'm working on one in an interdisciplinary degree, which focuses on tribal critical theory. And the specific thing that I'm focusing on is Indigenous digital art as a tool of resistance. And I've been accused of being a radical. I simply see myself as being a woman who also happens to be a precocious, bleeding heart, queer humanitarian abolitionist who wants to uncolonize the world and afford enough cheese to eat consistently in my diet. Let's see, I'm Statista Absalaga. I have been working in comedy as a stand-up comic. I have been nominated in the past for like a Native American Music Award for my entertainment in comedy. I'm a filmmaker, a director. I do art, poetry, photography. I do 2 free photo sessions a year from my portfolio, and the rest of the sessions I charge for. I do music, and of course, I'm a writer, a poet, and I have a graphic novel called Quantum that has been around for a couple of years now. I work in both fiction and nonfiction platforms. I have a couple documentaries that I've worked on and used in portfolios and such in the past. And I do a lot of research through, or I disseminate a lot of my research through like podcasts, social media, and I'm currently working on kind of, that's like the whole thing that I'm studying, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. I'm currently, like I said, pursuing my PhD, so I'm really just tired.
Thank you. That's awesome. Congratulations on going for your PhD. That's a big deal.
Thanks.
Okay, next we'll hear from Emmy Sings in Timber.
Bonjour. I'm Amy Sings in the Timber. I am a descendant of the Lac de Flambeau band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, Anishinaabe. And I am not as accomplished of an artist as these two wonderful women. However, I did go to art school a million years ago, and I sold work. I was a working artist when I was just a baby, practically, and then learned a lot of really hard lessons about artistic agency and some tough knocks. Ended up deciding to drop out of art school, actually, and I just really didn't think I could make it as an artist. I didn't think I could make a living as an artist all that time ago. I don't know if I don't regret much. I think that's the regrets are kind of a wasteful use of energy. But what I would say is that I've been amazed to see how things have changed over the last 25 years. And if I were that young person now, geez, I would have done everything differently. So I did end up going, I dropped out of art school, but ended up going into more traditional schooling, and on a long, windy path, got a law degree. And I quite literally started law school and didn't pick up a paintbrush for almost years. So I have more recently started to draw and paint and write poetry again. But I have not been a working artist for a long time. So I guess, most of what I maybe have to share on this panel comes from my experience in arts organization leadership. And I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that down the road, but I currently serve on the board of directors for Open Air. That is how Stony and I came to be in a fun and interesting way. And I also serve on the board of directors of the Missoula Art Museum. And one of the things that Stony and I kind of got up and going here, and now have the great pleasure of serving on a committee with Salisha and Cameron and Aspen Decker and Stella Null. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody at the moment, but has led to this very series of conversations here. And so I'm just real grateful for that. And yeah, that's kind of the long and the short of it. I guess primarily I'm a painter, and so visual art's been my first true love. And that's about it for me.
That's very awesome. Let's see here. So I'm going to jump right into the questions. The first question is, share with us your personal approach to creative agency or a lesson you learned on the value of agency in the arts. And I guess I'll shoot that at Mandy.
This is a long, complicated question, probably for every Native artist. For me, I think I didn't even know I had any agency for a very long time. I didn't know that, like, my creative expression, it was just something I did for myself, right, to ground myself and center. I began to read a lot of Native writers in particular, James Welch. His book of poems is like my Bible, Writing the Earth Boy 40. And I began to sort of think and, examine for myself internally, what does that mean? What does it mean that someone can be from a reservation, that I know really well, it's just down the road, and they can write a book of poems and sort of put it out in the world, and it takes on new life, and it sort of has its own journey. And I had never, again, thought that that was possible. And I think unfortunately, I think my mother never really got to actualize her own creative agency. And so that was sort of part of in my head, that's sort of, you're in this little box and you're sort of contained there. And I was also nervous when I began to write poems. I had a Native woman mentor, also a writer, who just told me to try and to sort of see where it took me. And I was very nervous. I did not want to be seen as a representative of my community, of my family, that I was saying the thing for everybody when I wrote a poem. And I think that's sort of very, very different from, in particular, Western white male writers, where they approach their agency as like, I am the voice, I am an authority, and they can operate from that place. But I don't think Indigenous people do. Everything I write and explore is really grounded in community and family, but also grounded in land and place. And I can't be creative. I can't express myself without all of those things sort of behind me and in front of me, really, surrounding me. When I became more confident and more comfortable, I mean, it's so nice to hear you, Lenny, and your activism and your real passion, because it took me a while to be like, hell yes, I can do this. This is an act of reclaiming voice and space and identity and narrative. So then it became really an act of empowerment for me. And so that's, where I just try to operate from now, knowing that I'm not a spokesperson for everybody. I hope I'm just sort of, one little thread, one little piece in many more, Assiniboine and Dakota and Lakota people sharing their own narratives and their own art and creative expression.
Awesome. Okay. Lenny, do you want me to reread the question?
Sure. I mean, we're just talking about agency in the arts and our personal approach. Mm-hmm. And so what I've been working on lately has been what I coined in a research delirium as in digital art, or in digital creation theory. And I'm currently working on a research proposal where I'll be dedicating the next 3 years of my life to study themes of Indigenous digital media and resistance. And this includes a study about how artists, including myself, are utilizing their voices online through websites and social media and adapting those spaces to innovate anti-colonial protests and activism. It's interesting how people can manage their own brands, do all of their creative work, produce, strategize, and even sell their work online in ways that are true to Indigenous knowledge systems that have been used since long before we had the internet. So the question of what is agency, it's the ability to basically know the rules and then break them. And that's important for Indigenous people because who makes the rules? Think about the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. Who made those rules? It wasn't Native Americans. And of course, because Indigenous artwork has monetary value for non-Indigenous people, their fingers were in the creation of these laws. So, and as a result of it, it harms Indigenous people. One time I was at a panel and a person came up to me afterwards and said that they wanted to, or that their work is inspired by Native Americans and often features Native Americans. So she markets herself as a Native American writer, an artist. And I had to tell her that she was breaking the law. But another time, a friend was talking to me about how they are not enrolled and can't market themselves as Native American artists. And so there's like problems when it comes to other people defining these what art is and gatekeeping what art is. And so that's why we can fix this by taking up our own space in the world of art and redefining it. And that is having agency. We didn't have rigid rules before we were colonized or before Columbus came over, however anyone wants to say it. Anthropologists have found styles across the Western Hemisphere that have shown that we have had fads, we have had fluidity in our designs and artistry, and we had people breaking the norms, whatever that means, forever. And so the colonized mindset of what is traditional holds us in a space, holds us in often a space that spans 15 years in the late 1800s, and it keeps us there. And as a result, we've been erased and kept from the world of art, formal art, media arts, film, literature. And so I think it's really, really interesting to see how people use poetry. I have quantum, and if you just look at the picture and like glance at it and look away, it looks like it's an end of the trail like picture, which always makes me cringe, which is why I did this as a final page on one of my comic book issues. But when you look closer, you realize she's standing on a hilltop trying to get phone reception for her cell phone. And so breaking down those rules and is just kind of like breaking down that implication that Indigenous people are artistically and technologically deficient and not capable of engaging in this world, the art world. And there's a morbid fascination of like what, with people discussing Indigenous limitations that aren't real. And we get to break those down and redefine them. And I think that that's where all of my like artistic agency like stems from. Sorry, that was a lot rant, but that's, yeah.
Not a rant at all. It's very powerful words. That's very awesome. Okay, Amy.
Yeah, and I'll just talk about a particular experience that I had with not having any agency whatsoever. And like I said, my experience is a while back. I attended the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design back in the early 90s. And at the time, if there were other Indigenous students there, I was not aware of them. And there were no faculty that identified as Indigenous at the school at the time. And so it wasn't even something that there was nobody within those walls to go to for kind of these conversations. And you know, I was really, I was young and I was naive in a lot of ways. I was 18 years old when I started school, art school, and I had a very unusual experience where I had gallery representation as a very young baby artist. Unfortunately, was there was, you know, a real downside to that, and it had everything to do with agency and being young and naive. But you know, the first gallery that had approached me to show my work was a Euro-owned gallery, a European-owned gallery, and you know, looking back now as an older person and knowing what some of those kind of fetishes and relationships are, those kinds of dynamics, there's a lot that is disturbing and unsettling to me about that early representation. But they called all the shots. I mean, all the shots. I didn't really feel like I had any agency or certainly not any voice or bargaining power. Everything from what pieces were selected, certainly pricing, and then you know, how things were promoted and all of that. I had no say in. It was sort of like, this is it or it's nothing at that time. I think that so much has changed, but I don't know, and I would love to hear from those of you who, you know, visual artists who have, or, you know, even in the publication world, like, how much are you getting a say in some of these things today? But at that time, I you know, it was just presented to me, and it seemed logical that the gallery was had all of the risk and the overhead and all of those things, and it was really how I accepted it. And now when I think about, as an older, slightly hopefully wiser person, I think about the development of your own business plan, and you know, really self-promotion is so very radically changed in these times. And but I still really I see the contemporary artists and writers that I know today, y'all are hustling, you know, that hasn't changed. There is a serious hustle. And so I don't even know if I were to dip my toe back into the world of trying to actually sell my work again. I don't know if I got that hustle in me. but I think it's so amazing that the, you know, this understanding of agency is really coming to be a big part of how Indigenous artists are approaching whether or not to try and give it a go as a profession, or how to balance that if you are someone who is still working a mainstream job while you're also doing this amazing work with being an artist.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to go on to the second question. Thank you, Amy. The second question: what was your first leadership role in the arts? How did you break into it? And what lessons did you take away from that experience? So, Mandy.
Well, I was thinking about this question, and I'm not sure about the term leadership role. I have definitely tried my best to be a good mentor. You know, I teach a lot of poetry to young students, and, you know, try to hopefully help them, you know, develop confidence in their voice and their abilities. And, you know, sort of beyond that, try to be a good community member, in the sense that, you know, Montana has a very, very rich literary tradition and community, broader community. And I try to, I have to bring sort of that a diverse perspective to that sort of group and body at all times. You know, have to be very vigilant in many different ways, but just to remind that broader community that has grown in its diversity of writers, but that we still have a responsibility to do more and to really build up, you know, from, you know, many different groups of people that, you know, voices have been, you know, kept out of not only the publishing world, but really kept out of the community, and sort of how that came to be. And just making sure that we, you know, my fellow Montana writers and, you know, the broader writing community, you know that we still have work to do. We still have representation issues, and we need to be hyper vigilant about that and be attentive to making sure that in whatever way we can, that we, you know, bring more into the community. You know, I've judged poetry book competitions. We have a great organization called Poetry Out Loud in Montana, where high school students, you know, memorize their favorite poems and get up and perform them. You know, lots of different ways that I've tried to be present, and again, just push for more voices, for more inclusivity and diversity. And so that's just sort of, you know, if I think of myself as a leader in the arts, which I guess I hadn't really done before, you know, that's just sort of what I always bring to the table. I always bring to the conversation is, you know, why aren't there more, in particular, Native people at this table or in this community? And what are we going to do about it?
For sure. Definitely always that question. Okay, Lenny.
It's kind of hard to think about my first leadership role in the arts. I was a creative child, spent a lot of my time in the woods. And at school, I was always putting together art projects under my desk while the teacher was talking. But I never saw art as a tool or a skill. I always felt it. I always just felt art. And I even feel like sometimes I remember art like kind of innately, or feel it like somehow in the air. And in my life, art has like consistently shifted my perspective from like this like victimized space to a strategic and sovereign space where I can own and define and create, like I said earlier. But one of the leadership roles that I took, and any, like, again, the term leadership role is really weird for me because I don't feel like that's even the right way to talk about it. But an example of something in my past was when I was working on my master's degree. I wanted to do a documentary about Indigenous comics in Montana. It's like 2017. And when I went to go do interviews, I couldn't find any women comics, Indigenous comics in Montana that I could interview. I couldn't find any. And so one of my friends at the time was actually holding workshops for women and non-binary people. And I wanted to do something similar and create a space for fellow comics. And then, you know, ultimately, this is what all of the things lead to, is creating space for fellow artists and fellow leaders across all of these fields to be able to step up and take these spaces. So I used my perseverance to create spaces as mentor, instructor, supporter. And support means financial and emotional. If you're supporting Indigenous people, Indigenous artwork, that means you should be supporting it financially too. And trying to help create like a legacy, like Mandy was talking about. At one time, it was a dream of mine to create a space in Missoula for Indigenous creators to be able to like utilize their art as a tool to collaborate and work together to kind of like reorder society. But it turns out that I'm really, really poor. I have 6 kids. And so I have to like scale some of my like big things down to more realistic ideas, like getting a 5th degree, which is also not scaled down at all. So my new dream is to work and encourage others to work toward a world where we can prosper like mentally, spiritually, and financially by returning to our long established usage of story work and words and teach and learn in a world where Native Americans have been consistently excluded. And that's the art world, but it's also like the film industry, the entertainment industry, the music industry. Like if you name any type of like art, despite us having our foot in the door the entire time, we are erased and excluded from it. And so breaking that down is what leadership means to me.
That's nice. That's a good answer. Okay, Amy.
Well, I'm going to talk about my leadership roles in very traditional, practical, like this is leadership, according to, according to a white colonialized world. So basically, you know, like I said, I left the space of being a working artist a long time ago, and it's allowed me to be my law degree and my role as a professional in several different capacities has allowed me to be in places where people who have agency all the time and have money comfortably a lot of the time are. And when I was making a big transition to move from Chicago back to Montana, because as Mandy pointed out earlier, when we have kids, sometimes that's some things are out of our control. And not that I wouldn't want to be back in Montana, but it was like a really specific moment in time that was going to happen. And at the time, I wanted to just sort of blow everything in my life up. And I had really been thinking, okay, I'm going to make these big transitions. I'm not going to get into a regular job again. I'm never doing it. And I'm moving back across the country. And I did that. And at the same time, I was like, I am going to start an artist in residence program for Indigenous artists and Indigenous artists only. And I've got a business plan. I'm going to do this. I signed up for, I got a scholarship to attend a conference in Minneapolis for the Alliance of Artist Communities, because I was really going to learn how to do this and do it well. And well, I ended up meeting Stony at the conference, and I 6 months after, roughly 6 months after, I came to the realization that I couldn't do things exactly the way that I wanted to at that moment in time. But that wasn't going to stop me from doing, like really getting to the heart of what it was that I was going to do. And so I had a conversation with Stony, and this initiative was off the ground, Western Montana Creative Initiatives, for just under a year at that point. The reality is, when I moved back to Missoula, I was talking to everybody in the arts community at the ZAC, at the MAM, at the Roxy Theater, like all the people that I knew from before in the arts community here in Missoula, and it's a really vibrant community. And they were like, "What you want to do? Have you talked to Stony?" I'm like, "I don't know Stony." So I meet Stony, and we talk about this thing, and I say, "I can't do the thing that I was thinking at this moment." And Stony said, "Would you consider joining this board of directors, and we can talk about how to do these things?" And so that's our meet cute, but it also is my first real leadership role in the traditional sense of a leadership role on a board of directors for an organization, a non-native led arts organization. And that leap for me, it really was because I had this immense trust in Stony and Hadley, and really believed that we could make some of those things happen. So I've really spent my time in this space, just trying to do just this, have these conversations, bring in Indigenous artists, learn more about how to really do the outreach to Indigenous artists to support and advance in that involvement. A few months after joining that board, also joined the board of the Missoula Art Museum, as I had mentioned. And I'll just say that role has, it has very different aspects and aspirations for me personally. And the way that I got into that space was I was volunteering, had been volunteering for arts organizations for a long time. In Chicago, I was a volunteer docent for the Museum of Contemporary Art, did a similar stint with the Art Institute in that space. And one of the first things I did when I came back into this community was knock on the door of the MAM and say, "Do you guys have a docent program? Have you thought about a docent program?" And they did. It was for fifth graders, and it was very different, but I got involved right away, and it's really opened up a lot of opportunities and possibilities for me to be able to do outreach and hopefully open some space and create some space and keep space for Indigenous artists. That's been my experience up to this point.
Very awesome. I just had a quick little blurb about Indigenous leadership. I think something that we've carried on as Indigenous communities is people will follow you and kind of make you a leader. So even when you don't think you are in that place, our Indigenous communities put you in that place. So I think you guys are good leaders. Okay, our third question. Each of you has had experiences with Indigenous-led and ally-led arts organizations or initiatives. How has your approach and experiences differed between the two? And what advice would you give to someone considering involvement with an ally-led organization or initiative versus joining or developing their own Indigenous-led organization or initiative? Mandy.
I'll be fairly brief on this one. I think Amy said a lot of really great, gave a lot of really great context around leading into this question. I served on the Board of Humanities Montana for 9 years. Obviously, I would consider that an ally-led organization, but, during time on that board, really pushing again and advocating amongst our committee that we increase representation, and that we be really intentional in our granting, and in our program development to make sure that we had, again, adequate representation from natives across Montana, and just being, just hammering that every meeting. And then it grows to the point where you, as the advocate and the voice, you don't have to do that anymore, because other folks around you it just becomes sort of embedded in the process. And that's important. It's why, you want to be on those ally-led organizations or initiatives, to sort of work yourself out of it, eventually. I will say, I've never started, my own initiative or organization. I think it's commendable, and it's really, the highest sort of level of community building and advocacy. It also feels like a whole lot of work. And there's, when we all have so many things in our lives and stuff on our plate, that can be daunting. But anyone that has done it, or anything that's out there, I'm happy to help, or jump on another board. We can always, we can all always add another one if it's helpful.
Awesome. Okay, Lenny.
As a person who exists mostly in the realm of academia, where art is pretty often defined, I've entirely cast off scholastically coded knowledge dissemination entirely. And I say sometimes because it's like impossible to entirely get around it sometimes in scholarly spaces. But that means for my degrees and for most of my work, I've opted for project or portfolio or presentations over journal publications. Yes, like I get the gasp every once in a while, like, how will other academics know that I'm smart? I'm not doing anything that I do for other academics. Where I'm from, wisdom hoarding is frowned upon as food hoarding. Historically, if somebody had hoarded anything from tools to knowledge, it would be at the risk of your family or even your society as a whole. If somebody, for example, knew how to grow like the biggest corns, the ones, with the most juice, but like kept it to themselves and didn't tell the rest of their tribe, that would be bad for them when wintertime comes around, because everybody has to depend on everybody else to survive. And so it's not something that I like. Wisdom hoarding is bad because of those reasons. So most of the information I get on these topics comes to me in code, buzzwords, academic big words in academic journals, in unattainable books that cost $100, $200, and they're not even textbooks. And ultimately, nobody can afford that. And so what I have been like working to do is decipher them and then redistribute them to the world in a way that's accessible to the most people. And basically when I define because I can define what accessible is with my work, I define it accessible as if all 6 of my kids can understand it, or even just one of them can understand it. And I have kids from age 7 to age 21. If my kids can't understand it, then it's not accessible. And we see this every day in social media. People are showing how to do their beadwork, how to cook fry bread, and they're sharing stories, traditional stories. They're sharing language. They're helping other people in their tribe learn their tribal language. And even if they don't do it perfectly, they're doing it in a way that is accessible, personable. And that is how it's been done. It's almost going back to our historical way of learning, which is important because the education system has been traumatic for us. Traditional educational styles are traumatic for us. and to kind of summarize everything that we've been talking about today, that allows us to define our terms, own our art, and give each other the space and encouragement to create. And we find that our work can be a powerful tool of resistance against colonialism in that way.
Thank you. Okay, Emmy.
I guess I feel like I touched on the reasons that I have considered starting an initiative versus really supporting an allied initiative or organization. I guess what I would say as far as somebody who's considering one or the other is you really have to like tap in to your personal reasons behind the, why it is that you would be starting that initiative to begin with, and then it's just kind of go through your values and your priorities at this particular stage in your life. So for example, there was no way that I was even in a place when I was a young artist. I couldn't have seen myself in either of those places. But that's just me personally. I couldn't have seen myself starting my own initiative or organization. I couldn't have even seen myself serving in a quote unquote leadership role at that time. But then later in life, I kind of did this assessment. Now I have a set personal sphere of my personal goals as well as my goals for my greater community. And so I thought I could make that go of doing an initiative, creating my own initiative. But I had to have some reality checks, and that was humbling. But at the same time, it really allowed me to distill some things down. And it really put me in a place where I could ask some very good questions of the folks that I was going to be allied, with, the folks that I was going to be helping their non-native led, but allied organization or initiative, and say, is this the right? Is this keeping with my true self and the goals that I've set for my family, my community, etc. And so, I'm going to take a temperature check again in another 3 to 5 years, and I'll see where I'm at, and where my family is at, and those kinds of things. And I hope I keep doing that, beginning and doing that periodically, because there might be a time, but that starting my own initiative is the thing to do. Or maybe serving in a capacity with another Indigenous-led initiative, because I hope like hell that some of this leads to more and more Indigenous-led arts organizations and initiatives. So maybe I get to serve on one of those boards or in some other capacity with that.
That's awesome.
That's what I got.
I think, so it's excuse me. So I'm on Pacific time. I would say 11:56. It's 12:56. I think we have time for like one question. Does anybody have a question? No question. Okay. So I'll just go ahead and let you guys know. Thank you to Mandy Smoker Broaddus, Lenny Peppers, Amy Sings and Timber. I think this is a good discussion, and especially the part about agency. I think the ideas that we have that you guys talked about are very inspiring, and I think those are the things that are representative of our Indigenous communities today. And it's good to be able to hear that discussion, especially coming from Indigenous women artists. I think that's pretty cool. It's pretty powerful. So I just want to thank you, and
Salisha, I have a question real quick, if I can interject, if we have
yeah,
enough
go
moments. I'm interested in, and this is maybe a fairly complicated question. Let's see if I can even get it out. But it has something to do with the nature of traditional ways of knowing, being connected to a community in a dynamic and integral way, and the juxtaposition of that in kind of a white dominant colonial, I think therefore I am kind of Cartesian approach to existence and identity as individuals, as individuals competing with other individuals for resources. And that shows up even in the art world, like how we even frame and structure the idea of art making and viewing and showing. That's a statement, but I'm just curious, like how you navigate that, or how that kind of impacts your creative practices or advocacy inside of the arts. And that's for anybody. I mean, Lenny, I'm curious your response to it, but it's really for anyone who's interested in that, taking that on.
Well, I do have to say that I have zero vested interest in fighting for my right to do artwork or any type of thing in any type of colonial structure. I'm entirely invested in the complete dismantling of colonialism and all of its ideals and oppressive systems and every person who perpetuates it. And since these spaces are gate-kept, often by non-natives, and exclude any race as us, and ensures that we disappear into prisons or poverty, or even worse, hashtag MMIP. I try to work in a way that, and it's impossible to not be able, not step into these spaces, but work in a way that I'm not going to end up as like a tokenized board member, or I'm not going to be perpetuating any harm to any other cultures when I do my own work, and instead trying to uplift our. And so that's it's kind of hard for me to talk about, like you said, it's a really complicated answer, but to talk about like working in these spaces when I've actively been working, or like trying to avoid working in those spaces the entire time I've been doing any of my work. As I get older and older, I'm in my 40s now, and it's just too exhausting to navigate it all the time.
Lenny, to follow up with that, can you help situate how you see the university system in that context?
I am clearly not a person who is, happy with the current academic system, and that includes elementary school all the way up through college. I am, like I said, working in academia, but and also, like I said, trying to avoid like falling into like having to do work just for other academics, and constantly battling like the definitions of who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing and who I'm supposed to be sharing this with. And so it's just kind of, it's not my favorite thing to talk about, but I do rant about it quite often. On the other hand, I also have received 5 degrees, which have helped me to be able to create platforms for other people. And I've been able to create documentaries and learn how to get those documentaries into the world, albeit using the information that I learned from the university and then coming home and teaching myself how to do it as myself. Mostly from other Native people, like helping me along the way. So it's a tool. The university is a tool for yeah.
Thank you. Well, just out of respect of everybody's time, thank you on behalf of Open Air and WMCI and Indigenous Initiative. And I hope you guys, just thank you guys for joining us, and thank the panelists for being with us today. And Mandy had to jump out, but just thank everybody. And I think that concludes the panel discussion today.
Thank you, Salisha.
Thank you, Salisha.
You guys are awesome. Miigwech.